On today's episode of The Lawyer You Know, we're going to talk about the coronavirus vaccine and break down how they determine who gets it first. Everybody's talking about the coronavirus vaccine, and they want to know who's going to get it first and can you be forced to take it. So to start out, the coronavirus vaccine got here faster than any vaccine I've ever heard of, and we all know how much red tape there is and how hard it is to get a vaccine to market. What makes this different? How did this process happen so quickly?
Well, the FDA's got a process known as the Emergency Use Authorization.
Okay.
And they've used it only once before in history, and that's in 2005 when they were talking about anthrax.
Okay.
So they used it for that once before, so this is the second time they've used it. It allows them to hurry up the process. For instance, right now, Pfizer and Moderna, they are in the lead. They're there. They've got the vaccine there at the FDA, and the FDA at any day is going to approve it for distribution.
So when the FDA allows this emergency process to be sped up, what is actually sped up? Is it just the testing? Is it the FDA's involvement in the process? Because how do they speed up making a vaccine?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the testing.
Okay.
For instance, Pfizer tested 44,000 people. They gave placebo to some, they gave the vaccine to some. It became 95% effective on the ones they gave it to. But in normal circumstance, the group or the population of the test would be much larger. It would be much longer. Because one of the things that we're not going to know because of the short time period is what the long-term effects are and all the side effects.
So basically they just say, the FDA just says that's okay.
Right, because it's effective and it's an emergency and we've got to get something out there.
So they lower the strict scrutiny of the testing for this virus because they feel like the reward outweighs the risk.
And they'll tell you, the people at the FDA will tell you, we'll take the vaccine ourselves because we still believe it is safe. They just don't know everything about it that they would normally know in a normal situation.
So they say 95% effective. That means effective on the people that get the virus or help preventing the symptoms of the virus, but they still feel comfortable about the risks, the health risks, and the negative side effects that may come with this vaccine.
Right. The only side effects they've seen so far are some headaches, some fatigue, very minor side effects. So they do feel comfortable.
And how does that affect guys like us that do personal injury plaintiffs work, especially the guys that do these big class action lawsuits against pharma companies? How is that going to affect a vaccine that was pushed through the system so quickly, which is going to be more likely, in my opinion, to have unknown negative side effects? How is that going to affect this entire process for guys like us suing these companies when they create problems for people that take this vaccine?
All right, there's a Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act that was passed under the Bush administration to protect vaccine companies. So generally speaking,
figures those Republicans protecting the big companies.
Well, it could be, but generally speaking, a vaccine company is protected from the side effects of its vaccine so that you can't sue them because they consider the vaccine so essential to public health that they gave them additional protections.
So a lot of times in the legal field, we talk about public policy arguments. And basically what that means is it's something that is so good for the public or something that makes so much sense that it couldn't be any other way. This is a public policy argument. Our world needs this vaccine, therefore we have to cut through a little bit of the red tape. We have to take a little bit more risk in order to save hundreds of thousands of lives. Therefore, we're going to let this vaccine get pushed through, even though it hasn't been through all the testing and all the red tape that most vaccines have to go through. Is that a good way to characterize it?
It is, and the courts have backed that up because they use public health as a reason to excuse a lot of things that normally we wouldn't expect.
Right, okay. So what role overall does the CDC play throughout this whole process?
Well, once it's approved, then it's the CDC's responsibility to make sure it's stored effectively, that it's safe, and that the distribution is safe and efficient. All of the vaccines that we take anywhere goes through the CDC. Okay. CDC keeps track of every dose that goes out and every side effect that may occur from that dose. Right now, the CDC, without this particular vaccine, distributes 75 million doses of vaccine every year.
Okay. All right, so the CDC basically is going to control distribution and tracking.
Yes.
Okay, so how are they going to decide how it's distributed?
Well, they've decided to do it, first off, they have a priority way of doing it. But the general statement they've made is, based on the population of a state, they're going to give that state its percentage of the doses of the vaccine.
So if there's 1 million doses, they're going to split it up by percentage for each state.
Right.
A percentage of that million.
A percentage of that million goes to each state, and then that state has to distribute it based on the CDC guidelines of the priorities.
So the state does not get to decide how it's distributed. They still have to follow the CDC guidelines.
What the state has discretion within the priority. For instance, priority number 1 is going to be healthcare providers. Well, within the healthcare providers, they can say, well, we're going to give this to certain hospitals.
Okay.
The hospitals themselves can say, all right, we have X number of doses. We think that nurses that work in the ICU should get those doses first.
Okay.
So there are ways of doing it, but you have to do it within the general guideline or priorities that's set by the CDC.
So it says healthcare providers, doesn't say doctors, doesn't say nurses, doesn't say emergency room, it doesn't say primary care physician, it just says healthcare providers.
Right. And right now in the country, that's about 5% of the population.
Okay, so then what's the second wave of priority?
All right, that's going to be what they call 1B, and that'll be people with health conditions. Older Americans that are living in nursing homes or long care facilities, they're the next group, and they're about 10% of the population.
Okay, what's the next?
Phase 2 are teachers, people that work in shelters, and older adults.
Just
That don't
generally, not
generally
necessarily
older
nursing
adults,
home.
right? And that's 30 to 35%. We get to phase 3, which are 40 to 45% of the population, young adults, children, essential industries like manufacturing and agriculture. And then phase 4 is everybody else.
So, and one of the parts that's important is people are worried about being forced to take this vaccination. So before we even get to that, I think it's important to point out that there are going to be a lot of people that want this vaccine that can't get it because there's not going to be enough of it at least at the outset. They said, 51 billion vaccines are going to be available in 2021. Did you read that?
51 billion?
I think that's what I read.
Now,
Worldwide.
Okay. Worldwide, I don't know the number worldwide.
That's what I heard.
But I can tell you that right now in the United States, at the end of December or mid-December, there's going to be 40 million doses available in the U.S.
Which isn't even going to cover phase 1.
It isn't, because you have to get 2 shots of each of these. So 40 million doses really means 20 million people. We have 21 million healthcare workers in the United States. And we have 3 million people that are elderly in nursing homes or long care facilities. So in that first round, you're still not going to be covering the 1A and 1B of the priorities.
All right, so exactly. So the first wave of these vaccines is only going to cover that phase 1 and maybe part of phase 1B, but it's not going to get to the everybody phase, which is way at the end, but let's still talk about it. A question everybody's asking is, can they be forced to take this vaccine? So we're going to go through some groups of people and determine whether or not we think they can force you to take the vaccine, starting with your boss, your employer. Can they force employees to take the vaccine before continuing to work at their company?
If it is reasonable to ask that for your employment, yes. For instance, you work in a
nursing home.
A nursing home, okay? You work in a nursing home. 39% of all the deaths from the coronavirus happen in nursing homes. So it would be reasonable for a boss to say, you need to take this vaccine.
But you're saying it's only appropriate or legal if there is that nexus that connects the vaccine to your job.
Yes.
Okay, so it can't just be you work from home in IT, I want you to get the vaccine, I force you to get the vaccine.
Yes,
You'd have a better
normally the way
argument,
it's interpreted. Yes.
Right, you'd have a better argument to not have to take the vaccine if you work from home doing IT and you never see anybody or come in contact with anybody. But if you are in one of the employment opportunities that does have a lot of contact, that's had a lot of coronavirus deaths, that has that nexus that connects the virus to your work, then you might be able to be forced to take that vaccine from your employer. Next, can you be forced to take the vaccine in order to travel state to state in your car?
Well, there's an interesting argument on that. The Supreme Court has said a state can require everybody in a state to take the vaccine. They're saying there's a public health, that's what we talked about earlier in this. There's a public health exception to forcing people to take it. So if they can require everybody in the state to have the vaccine, then I believe they can require everybody coming into the state to take the vaccine. So You know, if it's reasonable, if it's a public health exception and everybody in the state has to take it, then they're protecting that state, and all they're saying is you have to take it too. We're not stopping you from coming into our state. We're not stopping you from driving through our state. But if you do, you have to take the vaccine.
Okay, so then that leads us to the next one. I'll jump ahead a little bit. Can the government force all of the citizens of America, or state by state, can each state government force the citizens of their state to take this vaccine?
Okay, there's two questions there. Can the federal government force everybody in the country to take the vaccine? Can the state force everybody in their state to take it? Yes to the second question. A state can do that. It first happened back in 1905 with smallpox in Massachusetts. The U.S. Supreme Court said Massachusetts required everybody to take that smallpox vaccine. There was a, quote, public health emergency, and yes, they could force you to do that.
Let's pause the conversation there for a second. So when you say a state can force somebody to take this vaccine, what is the repercussion for not taking it? Because I know one of the things that a lot of state schools do is you have to have your shots up to date for your kids. You have to have them vaccinated, but there's no penalty if you don't get your kid vaccinated. They just go to homeschool or to a school that allows it, or not a state-funded school. Is it going to be something like that where you just don't have the same opportunities if you're not vaccinated? Or is there actually going to be a civil fine or criminal penalty if you're not vaccinated as a citizen of a state that requires vaccination?
Well, what they normally do is they make, quote, reasonable accommodation. Like you're saying, when the child didn't take the vaccine, then that child could not expose himself to the other children, and they homeschool them. The same would happen in a state that happened in Massachusetts as well, that if you didn't take it, now in Massachusetts, they were actually able to fine them. You don't take it, you get fined X number of dollars. Back then it was, 1905 was $5 if you didn't take the smallpox vaccine. So they can fine, they can do penalties, or they can make a reasonable accommodation.
Okay, so then there would be some sort of tracking, obviously.
Yes.
You'd have to answer on your taxes or something whether or not you took the coronavirus vaccine.
Or you have to have a card with you that says you have it, like...
Or on your phone where they're asking you at all times, have you gotten the vaccine? Have you gotten coronavirus? Where are you when you got it? Tracking, stuff like that.
Right.
Okay, which I'm sure will be easier now than it was in 1905. All right, now let's get to the broader question. Can the federal government force every citizen of the nation to take the vaccine?
There has not been a case like that. Normally, in these kind of situations, it's a state by state. We've seen in our country now, with the way everybody handles the virus, that the governors have been the ones responsible for their individual states, the mandates, the executive orders. It's all been the government. Normally, the federal government doesn't get involved in that. There's only that one case in 1905, and that's the basis of all cases that followed it. And that was a state case where one state was ordering it, and the court said it was fine.
What about traveling from one country to the other, having something on your passport? Can individual countries force that for travel? Can the United States force that? How does that work with the vaccine?
Well, anybody who travels knows that there's already required vaccines when you travel. You've got to present a health card in a lot of countries to show that you've had this vaccine or that vaccine, malaria, the common thing, smallpox. Mm-hmm. Those are all common. It certainly is not going to be anything new to have another vaccine added to that required list when you travel to another country.
So what does all this mean for our home state of Florida?
Well, in mid-October, Florida established their plan. They should be getting 1 to 2 million doses themselves. The governor has already labeled 5 hospitals that are going to get the first group of doses. Keep in mind, we haven't mentioned this, but the Pfizer vaccine has to be kept at 80 degrees below zero. So there has to be some special refrigeration in order to preserve this.
Just storing it is a mission.
And we're all set up.
Right.
Florida has 1.34 million licensed healthcare workers. We have 82,000 doctors, 364 RNs. We have 368
364,000.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. We have 368,000 residents of long-term care facilities.
Probably one of the most across the country.
I'm absolutely sure.
Yeah.
So we have a dire need for this vaccine. Florida alone has 4.34 million people over 65 years old. Again, these are all going to be priority people that are going to get it first. So in 3 to 6 weeks after it's approved, we should be getting our doses. Walgreens and CVS have been assigned to give it to the long-term health facilities. Florida's pretty much all set.
Okay, so what is it? What does the projection look like? How long until this virus is supposed to get? I'm sorry. How long until this vaccine is supposed to get the coronavirus under control worldwide or nationwide, whatever you've seen?
Well, interestingly, Britain is about 4 days ahead of us in approving the vaccine. They're bragging about
And
that.
they're staying 4 days ahead of us? That
Yeah,
sounds
they're 4 days ahead of us, yeah. Well, Dr. Fauci says by mid-April, it should be available to everybody in the United States. CDC is saying May to June. The point is, even though it's available to everybody, we know that there's a large group that is not going to take, there's anti-vaccine people who are not going to take the vaccine.
And those are the vaccines that have actually been tested, so they're definitely going to do everything they can to fight this vaccine.
Right. So you've got that. You've got a situation that people have already had the virus and don't want to take the vaccine. And they say that people that have the virus should still take the vaccine. The other is children. They have not really tested this vaccine a lot on children, so they can't say what effect it's going to have on children. So there's going to be a percentage of the population that's not going to take it. That again is 95% effective.
So there's going to be a percentage of people that it doesn't work on.
Yeah, so I think this is going to be around a lot. It's just we're not going to see the same numbers. And if we get it under control into a reasonable number, people are going to feel more comfortable.
So you think April, May basically is the projection, 2021, April, May.
That's when they get it. That's when they're going to get the vaccine. It may be a while before we see the effects of getting the vaccine.
Okay, are you going to take the vaccine?
Yes.
I'm not.
Oh, I am.
Not unless they force me to.
I
They
am
have to
going to
drag
take
me
it.
to the doctor's office to take it. So I'm very proud that you didn't mix up vaccine and virus like I did a million times. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that episode. If you like this content and want more of it, like this video, comment on it so we know what you're looking for, subscribe to our page so that you don't miss the videos coming up in the future.